All right, here we are finally at the last idol in section 2. I hope that your journey through section 2 has gone well. Hopefully it hasn't felt too overwhelming. My hope throughout this whole journey, through this whole book, is to just pull back the curtain on these idols and help us all look beyond their shiny facade and see what's really underneath. And hopefully the sociological data in each chapter has helped you see that, has helped you see how many of these idols promise life but deliver death. And then hopefully too, you've been able to fix your eyes and your heart and your mind on Jesus and see that we were made for so much more. So yeah, we are here at this 5th idol. Now it's pretty funny. I like to tell the story that when I approached my publisher with this book idea, my editor was like tracking with me, with the first 4 idols, like, yeah, got it. But then I get to this last idol in the book and they're like, what? This seems like it doesn't fit in this chapter. But as I talked more about just the reality of where marriage and motherhood has been wrongly placed in the church, I would say purity as well, those sort of 3 altogether, and been put on a pedestal, the publisher was convinced, you're right, all of these idols have to do with our gender, with our identity, with where we put our hope, with places where we go, I've got to reach this status, or I've got to have this background or this identity so that my life really has meaning, so that I'm really considered valuable or sanctified or mature. And then another thing I like to tell people too is whenever I talk about my book with other authors or speakers, other women who are seeking to do ministry in the church, and I get to, again, I'm like this idol, and they're tracking, and then I say this idol. Well, for women who are in ministry in the church, when I get to this 5th idol, every time, hands down, they are like, yes. In fact, you should have written the whole book just on this one idol, because they've got a front row seat to women in the church who are either married and mothers and are experiencing just woundedness because of an unintentionally placing these good gifts on a pedestal and making them ultimate gifts, or single women in the church or childless women in the church who are experiencing great and deep wounds inside the church because we have inadvertently, and in some cases very subconsciously, said to them or communicated to them they're less valuable or less mature or less worthy in the church because of their status as single women or childless women. So interesting conversations that happen behind the scenes with this book that tell me that this chapter really is needed, because it's clearly another hot button topic that's maybe not assumed like the other 4, but a conversation we need to be having no less. Now, let me be really clear. I think that the church was so right to push back against the sexual revolution and against the other 4 idols that we've already looked at. Since the sexual revolution happened and so many changes have transpired in our society over the last 50, 60, 70 years, I think the church has been right to say, no, marriage and motherhood are worthy of protection. We should cherish them. This is God's good design, and so on. So I think the church has been right to do that. But in so doing, then, we have accidentally placed these gifts, good gifts, on a pedestal and made good gifts into ultimate gifts. And so in that way, then, this particular idol relates to that older brother, right? So if the younger brother relates to the first 4 idols, in terms of going out to a far country, leaving the good gifts and the safety and the protection and the feast and the provision and the love of the Father, and instead going out and saying, no, I don't really want this. I want to go out to the far country and I want to find my identity in reckless living and foolish living. I want to have a good life out there. So that's the prodigal, right? That's the younger brother. But then we have this older brother back home who puts all of his hope and trust and identity and value in behaving just so, right? Like we see in the parable, he says to the father, I have always obeyed you. I've done everything you commanded. And what have you given me? And we see there that the older brother is expecting a transaction from the father. He too did not really want a relationship with his father. He was not all about abiding in the Father and enjoying a relationship with the Father. He wanted the goods. He wanted to be paid. He was keeping score of his good behavior. And then he tells his father, you owe me. And so I think if we're honest, we have to inspect our own hearts and go, that happens to me too. I behave just so. Maybe I stayed pure. I married a godly man. I'm raising my kids in the Lord. And they're not delivering. what the world and what maybe even the church told me they would deliver, God, and we demand payment. Or maybe we've stayed pure and behaved just so, and we haven't received a husband or we haven't received children. And we look at the Lord and go, but I've done everything right. Don't you owe me? And so we can see ourselves, as hard as it is to admit or to sometimes see, we can see ourselves too then in the older brother. So my hope in this chapter is to really convince you and remind myself, convince the reader, that relationships in the church are eternal and primary. So our relationships with each other as sisters in Christ are eternal and primary. But the relationships I have in my family are temporary and secondary. I will not always be married to my husband. These relationships in this family are temporary and secondary. And the preeminent relationships then are with my brothers and sisters in Christ Jesus. I think that because we have been pushing back on the sexual revolution and the idols of our age for the last several decades, which again is a good thing, but what inadvertently happened was two things. We elevated marriage and motherhood to a status that they do not warrant. And we also have prioritized our own families over the family of Christ. And in doing so, we have alienated our single siblings. So as you have this conversation in your group, and maybe you're a single woman leading it and you can share it personally, maybe have some private conversations before this meeting with the single women who might be in attendance and just ask her, with care, have you felt alienated? Have you felt what Jen is talking about in this chapter? Have you felt less than? And I don't think every single woman is going to answer in the same way. They are as diverse as our God is creative. But my experience is that many of them will tell you, yes, it's very hard to be single, or it's very hard to be childless inside the church, because we have spent so much time elevating, protecting, creating ministries and programs and activities specifically for the family. And so many of our single siblings just feel really alienated. So my hope is to just renew our minds in this chapter and to again put the family of Jesus back in its rightful place, and that is that it is primary and it is eternal. And my hope is that this chapter provides just that gentle correction to those of us in the church and those of us who are older brothers and sisters. So I have two resources that I want to recommend to you. One, I realized I've loaned out and I haven't received it back. I can't even remember who I loaned it to, but it's Rachel Welcher's book, and I will link it below this video, and it's Talking Back to Purity Culture. A very helpful book, very good resource. So Rachel Welcher, Talking Back to Purity Culture. And here's another great book by Sam Allberry, who his name seems to keep coming up, but 7 Myths About Singleness. Such a helpful resource. Add this to your library. It's a thin book, but really full of great theology and doctrine, and just really helped me see things more clearly so that I could write about them in this particular chapter. Okay, so keep on keeping on. After this session, you're done with the idols. And then we have just 2 more chapters. And I'm telling you, you guys, chapters 9 and 10 are so fun. Like, we are going to leave these counterfeits in the distance. And then chapter 9 and 10, I had a blast writing both of those chapters. And it's just like, we're going to just focus on the so much more that we were made for in Christ. And so as you make your way through this one last idol, you can breathe a sigh of relief and realize after this, chapters 9 and 10 are going to be like a party. So thanks for joining me, and we'll look forward to next week.